The Premier and top ministers are out making big announcements. The other party leaders are too. And of course, the campaign-style ads have already begun. In case you hadn't stopped to calculate it, there are still 226 days until Ontario goes to the polls next June. With us now on what to expect in the months ahead, all in the provincial capital, and we'll introduce them in the order of their party standing in the House. Let's welcome, in the downtown core, Ginny Roth, progressive conservative strategist, national practice lead for the government relations firm Crestview Strategy. Kim Wright, NDP strategist and principal at Wright Strategies. In Midtown, Sumi Shan, vice chair of the 2022 Ontario Liberal Party campaign. She was the Liberals' candidate in Scarborough Rouge Park in 2018. And you can't do a show like this without an ink-stained wretch. And thankfully, in Dufferin Grove, we've got Rob Ferguson, the Queen's Park reporter for the Toronto Star, joining us tonight as well. Great to see everybody. Thanks for coming aboard for our program tonight. Let's start. We're just going to throw it right to the ads. I've been watching a lot of baseball lately, as has Fergie as well. And, one of the things you see a lot of in between innings are ads like this. Sheldon, roll it if you would.
I hear it all the time. Politicians are famous for finding reasons to say no. That's not me. I'm Doug Ford, leader of the Ontario PCs, and we're the party saying yes. Yes to more opportunity, bringing more workers into skilled trades. Yes to building highways you can drive on so you don't sit in gridlock. Yes to building homes more families can afford. We're the only party looking to the future, and we're ready to build.
Now, that's obviously a, if I can call it this, a feel-good ad, not an attack ad. But, Jenny, what's the thinking behind it?
I think the thinking is when you think about an election, the goal is to set a frame, right? And in a dream world, as a political party, you want the other parties to step into your frame because then they're answering your question and you're the answer for voters to that question. And I think this job does a really good this ad does a really good job of setting that frame because we're already seeing the attacks on the PCs. So they get attacked for their MZOs, their ministerial orders to allow for new developments. They get attacked for trying to build a Highway 413. And by setting up this ad, he's saying, yeah, you can attack me for that, but I'm the premier that says yes. And I'm on the side of people who want those things, who want more housing, who want highways, who want to be able to get around the province. And so it almost preempts the attacks, I think, that will be laid against him. And it puts him in the driver's seat to drive that message himself and make all of the other leaders in the election campaign step into his territory and fight on his terms. So Kim, I think that's what it's trying to accomplish, and I think it does.
Right. Kim, the direct inference I suppose we're supposed to draw from this is if Doug Ford is the candidate of yes, that must make Andrea Horwath the candidate of no. Are you concerned about that portrayal?
Oh, absolutely not. And look, I love when people start to say, oh, they're attack ads, they're negative ads. No, they're contrast pieces. And the reality is that how Doug Ford has governed this province has not lived up to the hype. He talks about being the party of yes, but he also is the party of slashing city councils, bigfooting over municipal decision making, not actually building the amount of housing that is frankly needed. And one doesn't need to just look in downtown Toronto, but in every town and city in this province. And there is a massive homelessness problem and there is a mental health problem, and we're not getting to it, let alone the fact that long-term care, when my father was in long-term care, it cost me more than my apartment in downtown Toronto did to put him in long-term care every month. And that wasn't a bells and whistles place. It was, how do people afford that? So when I look at what Andrea Horwath and the New Democrats are bringing forward, it really is about how do you make people understand that there are consequences to what governments do and say, and those consequences have been coming home to roost. And so Doug can talk about the yes, but it's the question of what is he saying yes to and who is he saying yes to?
Okay, we'll show an NDP spot in just a moment's time, but Sumi, let me get your take on that ad and whether or not you're concerned that, again, if Doug Ford is the candidate of yes, that means he'll try to portray you and your leader, Stephen Del Duca, as the party of no.
Well, I think to Kim's point, what is Doug yes for? Is he yes for big box stores versus small businesses? It was a yes for helping support the healthcare system when it was at the brink of collapse during the recent couple of months. So it's just a matter of understanding what he is yes for. And what we've known is that he's been yes for repeatedly making mistakes, mishandling files. and saying yes to his special interests and holding powers versus supporting vulnerable individuals or our education system or our healthcare system. I think that's important to contrast, is that he is yes for his being able to hold the power and to be able to support his special interests versus the people of Ontario.
Rob, maybe I could get you to explain why 7.5 months before the election is actually supposed to happen, we're starting to see so many ads all over television, radio, online, digital, on your Facebook pages, etc. Why is all this happening now?
Yeah, I noticed them all over the football games and baseball on the weekend as well, Steve. And what we've got here is the new election spending ads or rules. So once we get 6 months out from the election, then parties cannot do all this advertising in an unfettered manner. Right now, they can kind of spend as much as they want. So they're trying to get these ads out now to get a head start on painting the opponents.
And I noticed that the NDP is out with ads, the PCs are out with the ads. The Liberals are not yet. Is that presumably because they don't have as much money as the other guys?
I believe they're coming, and Stephen Del Duca, the leader, has said there won't be attack ads. We'll see how long that lasts once we get into the campaign, because this should be a wild one. And when Ford is doing these I'm the man of yes ads, I just think how much fun we can have with that. All the things he said no to, like some of the like Sumi and Kim were saying, he was no to the higher minimum wage. He was for a long time no to the paid sick days, those kinds of things that I think that ad actually, despite what Ginny said, and I get their strategy there, but these I'm the yes man ads do, I think, leave him open to some criticism that the other parties can have some fun with, and so can all of us in the press gallery, because we're looking for answers and we want a yes. We want him to answer.
I mean, Ginny, that's not a bad point. The fact is, Doug Ford has said no to a lot of things. Sometimes he eventually gets to yes, but he often starts at no. You concerned about the opposition being able to portray him that way?
I think they'll try, but I think that's the beauty of setting the narrative, is that then people are fighting on your turf. And over the next 6 months, I mean, it's really not a long time until voters go to the polls in the spring. It's got to happen June or earlier. I could see it happening earlier if we've got a budget that ends up being basically a campaign budget or a campaign document. And the party, the PC party, has way more money than the other guys do. And so they have an ability to reach people and reach them specifically about the commitments that the Premier will make over the next 6 months. And there's all sorts of stuff that he's going to want to do that I think ideologically the NDP and the Liberals won't. So, I mean, Kim made the point about wanting to fight with municipalities, but then also wanting to build housing. Well, you have to have a bit of a fight with municipalities in order to build housing, because the biggest impediment to housing in the province is municipal zoning restrictions. I think the Premier is willing to have a bit of that fight. He's having it right now in Hamilton, and he knows that public opinion is moving a bit. People finally want him to have that fight. There's a massive housing shortage. That's why it was such a big issue in the federal election campaign. And so I think the PCs are looking forward to what people are going to be, what's going to be top of mind in May or June when they vote. And he knows that arguing about what happened 2 years ago is just not going to be that relevant to voters.
Okay, since we're all in such a friendly mood today, we're not going to call these attack ads. We're going to call them, as Kim suggested, contrast ads. And here is the NDP attempting to contrast itself from the current Premier. Sheldon, roll it if you would.
This guy says he's for the little guy. But when workers need paid sick days, Doug denies them. When local businesses need help, Ford sides with big box stores instead. Doug Ford, here for his buddies, not for you.
Kim, what's going on there?
Look, it is exactly as it is portrayed. It's pretty simple. You can talk the talk about it's, he's all for the yes and all of these things. But paid sick leave is still a major issue. The lack of an agreement on childcare is appalling to me. The fact that we are still finger pointing and still saying this isn't good enough and that's not good enough, when people have to, before they even think about getting pregnant, have to sign up for daycare. So how do we deal with this? And, if you look at, talk to any of the parents of autistic children, They certainly haven't been hearing a whole lot of yes. The fact that there have been promises and then cuts and then cuts and then the comments of things like, just give them an iPad, it'll be fine. That's not governing. So it really does boil down to that. So Andrea is making that contrast of, Doug Ford is here for his buddies, not for working families, not for people who are trying to have that better life in Ontario that we all want to see. And he is certainly no friend to, the environment or to actually building housing. Ministerial zoning orders are well and swell, but there's a lot of things that could have actually been done, and certainly with wraparound services and mental health support. So we see lots of ribbon cutting, and goodness knows we're going to see lots of ribbon cutting over the next 6 months. But it's what's actually being done. Can people actually get mental health supports, addiction supports, the counseling that they need? And especially coming out of this pandemic, people are expecting better because they've had a very different lived experience over the last 2 years.
Sumi, how effective do you think that ad is?
I think to Kim's point, I don't believe it's effective at all. I think it allows us to be able to argue that, he's been the yes man for special interest. It's easy enough to do attack ads, or as you say, contrast ads, when you have no plan. And that's what we're seeing from both the Tories and the NDPs. We're not seeing any plan to help the vulnerable or the Ontarians as we're coming out of the pandemic. What does that mean for our housing? What does that mean for our infrastructure, education, healthcare? There are so many things that we should be talking about, but instead we're attacking each other. I wonder if this is the leader that we want going in as we're coming out of this pandemic. I think what the last couple of months have shown us is that we want a government that cares for us and is going to be able to act and to support us when we need it the most. And so far, we have not seen that.
Rob, one of the reasons we wanted you on the program tonight is that we wanted somebody, quote unquote, who doesn't have a dog in the fight, who can tell us, how accurate these ads are. There are a lot of allegations made in that ad. I mean, you've looked at it. How accurate do you think these charges are?
Well, one of the things that Ford had a problem with in the first couple of go-rounds, first couple of waves of the pandemic was like that ad said, which was, you could still go to Walmart and get socks. You could go to Costco and get socks, but you couldn't go to, Joe's Menswear to get socks. So they corrected that in the spring wave, where they did shut down those departments in Costco and Walmart. So I think that's going to be a lingering perception, because we keep hearing the business community harping on that. And we saw a revisit to it just a week and a half ago when on a Friday afternoon at 4:30 on the eve of Thanksgiving, the government announced that, stadiums, concert halls, like the Scotiabank Arena for the Leafs and the Raptors could open to full capacity. And yet, for example, restaurants are left at half capacity with really no explanation. So, I see this news release come into my email box and I go, oh man, the restaurants are going to be super angry about this. And they were. And, the government tried to dodge this by putting it out late on a Friday afternoon by a long weekend. But, it was back on the front burner, like, so much leftover turkey dinner in the microwave the whole following week. And then they had to do a scramble to kind of do damage control. And now, supposedly later this week, we're going to get a plan that tells what's going to happen with restaurants and other venues like gyms that are still, and dance studios, whatnot, that are bowling alleys that are still limited to half capacity. So, yeah, I think that's still hanging.
Ginny, I do need to ask you about that. And let's hit it on the head here. The ad claims that Doug Ford is acting on behalf of bigger corporate interests at the expense of the little guy who he purports to represent. He opens Scotiabank Arena for 20,000 people, but forces the restaurants only to half capacity. Is he vulnerable on that charge?
Well, don't forget that he ran as for the people the last time around. And I think the reason that worked is because the Fords, both he and his late brother, have this sort of cultural connection, or perceived to, and I think it's genuine, with the working classes across Ontario. And I think that lingers. I think that remains. There's no doubt that there was a moment in the premier's tenure where he had some really tough choices to make. Every elected official across the country did, and it comes down to businesses who, workers only have jobs if businesses can employ them, but workers are also consumers. And those consumers want to be able to get groceries in the middle of a pandemic. They want to be able to have experiences and sort of go back to normal. And so balancing how to be for the people and how to be the guy who says yes, and thinking about workers, not just as workers, but also consumers, has been a challenge. And I think the premier's pivoting now back to, you can see, especially in his Minister for Labour, Monty McNaughton, a real effort to reconnect with working people and prioritize what they care about. There's a package coming, I think, this week from the Minister of Labour that is really going to seek to lean into the take-home pay and the benefits of workers across Ontario as people struggle to rebuild coming out of COVID and rebuild their families and their home lives. And the economy, by all counts, is doing okay. I mean, there's actually a worker shortage right now, so people are getting back to work, and that's a good thing. And I think the premier is gonna use that Minister McNaughton, to reconnect with those people and remind them why he's for the people, as he did so well in the last election.
Do you know what the slogan's going to be for the next campaign, incidentally?
Well, I think the ad that you played off the top is a good indicator that the PCs are the party of yes. I don't know if that'll be the slogan, but it makes sense to me as a core narrative campaign.
Gotcha. Now, here's one of the things that's been really unusual about some of the ads that are running right now. You can understand the NDP taking out ads against Doug Ford. His party's in government. They are the big kahuna that the NDP want to take down. But the NDP have also taken ads out against Stephen Del Duca, the Liberal leader. The Liberals have 7 seats. They're in 3rd place. Del Duca himself doesn't even have a seat. Let's give you a snippet of that, and we'll talk after this. Go ahead, Sheldon.
But this guy thinks the job belongs to him. You might not remember his name, but you'll never forget his record as Kathleen Wynne's right-hand man, making big cuts and bad choices together, slashing healthcare, and sending your hydro bill through the roof. Now he wants to be premier, to do it all again. Stephen Del Duca, back for power, not for you.
Kim, why would the NDP spend money going after 3rd place instead of 1st place?
So I think it's important that people remember what was that record. You know, sometimes people look back nostalgically, and maybe it wasn't so bad with these people. And ultimately, when we start to see where people still are, and they're still very concerned about the Liberals being much more rhetoric than actual reality. They certainly cut a lot of things, and they didn't live up to the hype of their promises, because really their hearts were never into supporting a guaranteed basic income. They were never going to do actual reform on long-term care, because they had 15 years and never got it done. So there's lots of people who want to say, oh, but wouldn't it be great if we just went back to those Liberal governments? But the reality was that no, those weren't actually benefiting people. And, there's a Liberal strategist, Omar Khan, who actually in the dying days of the last election said, oh, actually, Andrea Horwath is the problem. Doug Ford's going to be great for Ontario. So, there's lots of things that it's important for people to remember about those 15 years under the Liberal government. And Stephen Del Duca will try to say, but we need to look forward, not back. But he also was not only a senior cabinet minister on transportation that frankly wasn't getting delivered, especially around the GTHA, but he was also a backroom hack for 30 years, a strategist for Kathleen Wynne. So it is actually a valid point to say right-hand man, the strategist, the guy behind the curtains before he got to be the guy making decisions. And his decision-making is questionable at best.
Kim,
so
we got to do a little fact check here. Stephen Del Duca, I think, is 46 years old. So he can't be a backroom hack for 30 years. That would have started him at 16.
Oh, he in fact talked the other day about, in his speech, about how he was starting in campaigns and in politics for 30 years and worked his way up and has been doing the job certainly
I don't think he called himself a backroom hack, though.
Oh, I'm certain he would never call himself a backroom hack, but he was certainly on the senior leadership campaigns for all of the McGuinty years and prior to that. So yeah, it is actually quite accurate to say Stephen Del Duca has been an architect for the bad campaigns and the bad governing for quite some time.
Okay, Sumi, let me get to you on this point, and that is that obviously the NDP and the Conservatives are running the same kind of ads against Del Duca. They're trying to basically frame him before he gets a chance to define who he is himself to the people of Ontario, because he's the least well-known of all the leaders. And I wonder, this is a tried, tested, and true program that works. Just ask Michael Ignatieff. You guys worried about this?
No, I think, what is that saying that the worst thing about being talked about is not being talked about at all. And, it shows that both the parties are afraid of what the Liberal Party stands for, what our leader and our team will be able to do for Ontario. We've done a lot in the past. And, I think Ginny mentioned it, not all leaders get it right, all the time. But, for the most part, well, what the Ontario Liberal Party has done for Ontario and its citizens, I think can certainly hold to test in comparison to the NDP, who have had a leader for 15 years, hasn't recently only in the last election has squeezed into opposition. And that was because, the Ontario Liberal Party, unfortunately, wasn't able to make government or opposition. So it really shows, are they able to be able to make the next government and be able to support Ontario? I don't think so. I think Stephen Del Duca, as a leader, knows the people of Ontario, has supported government, and we've done a lot over the last years when it comes to coming out of the recessions, pulling back all of the decimation from the Harris days. It took a long time to be able to get back Ontario on a good footing. We gave Ontario on a good footing to the Tories, and what happened? We've lagged behind when it comes to healthcare, to education, where we are the party that's moving forward. And attack ads and all of this is just shows of desperations. They don't have a plan, therefore they're looking to attack to our party leader. And I just think that shows you exactly who they are.
Ginny, I guess I'd ask you the same kind of question I asked Kim, because you guys are running the same kind of ads, trying to tie Stephen Del Duca to Kathleen Wynne. And I guess the question is, do you think it's still good politics in 2021, 2022 to keep bringing Kathleen Wynne's name up, given that she's not going to be on the ballot in the next election?
Well, the last election wasn't that long ago. I mean, I think Sumi said that they gave Ontario to the PCs in great shape. Well, they didn't give Ontario to the PCs. Ontarians were very clear that they were done with the Liberals a few years ago. And it wasn't, things were not in good stead. I mean, energy prices were out of control. People couldn't afford their hydro bills. They were fed up with all sorts of things about, after a decade of Liberal government. They were sick of it. Now, the Liberal brand, I think part of why you see these attacks on Del Duca is because the Liberal brand isn't as weak. The Liberal brand federally is obviously quite strong in Ontario still. And, people as a centrist party, the Liberals, I think, can benefit from that. But one of the worst jobs in politics is being leader of the opposition. I think it's even worse to be leader of the third party because it's really hard to get attention. Fergie and his gallery, make their best effort, but it's really hard to cut through on provincial politics in the Canadian news. And as a third party leader, it's really, really hard to get attention. And so what happens is voters don't pay attention to you or notice you until the RIP period, until those days of an election campaign. And, the Del Duca team is going to want to make sure that he is popular when he's finally turned to. And if the NDP and the PCs keep hammering him and his brand and tying him to Wynne, who we know is very unpopular over these next 6 months, I don't think that bodes well for how Ontarians will view him when they finally start paying attention.
Well, okay, again, Rob, we need you here for Truth in Advertising. Mm-hmm. Both of the ads by the NDP and the Progressive Conservatives are calling Stephen Del Duca Kathleen Wynne's former right-hand man. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. No, I kind of laugh at that because I think that's quite a bit of flattery, maybe unintended flattery for Stephen Del Duca. He was mostly transportation minister during that time. He wasn't that big a figure, so they're trying to, pump him up for their own purposes. There, I'm not sure how well that's going to go because people might be saying, "Well, I don't even know really who Stephen Del Duca is, so how could he have been Kathleen Wynne's right-hand man?"
I want to now have a little bit of a discussion about something Premier Ford said last week, which I've kind of never heard a politician say before. The Premier said, quote, "The worst place you can give your money is to the government. It doesn't matter if it's municipal, provincial, or federal." Ginny, how should we interpret that?
Well, I think, we can always go back to the Ford family brand is strong. And I think one of the premier strengths is that he has sort of a gut instinct about how people feel about government and how they want government to intervene in their lives. They appreciate services. They appreciate things that only government can build, like highways and transit and all the things that he wants to say yes to. But at the end of the day, they don't want to be taxed into oblivion. I mean, his brother learned this by talking about the gravy train at the City of Toronto, and I think that remains. And don't forget, as these issues progress on the provincial landscape, there are a lot of things going on. There is inflation that appears to be potentially going to be sticking around a lot longer than people realize. The cost of living is going up. And I think people are going to become very, very, very sensitive to any kind of new tax or fee. And we know that when parties of the left are given power, they want to find a way to fund their promises, and they are more comfortable with taxing people than certainly Doug Ford is. And so he wants to remind people that he reduced their cost of living, and he wants to remind them, I think, that other parties would intervene and take more money out of their pockets if they were able to get power back.
Kim, what did you think when you heard the Premier say that?
That he still fundamentally doesn't understand the value of government and the value of supporting Ontarians. Look, this is a big province. It takes a lot of money to run, but there's also a lot of situations that can be recalibrated. Certainly, healthcare can be recalibrated, but it has to be recalibrated in a way where people actually can access services. And I'll tell you, I grew up as a border kid outside of Windsor. You didn't have to look very far to understand how quickly you could become homeless by just having to go to the hospital. Those are not the things we want to see. But the corollary of that is that there are lots of services we do need to support people on, making sure that not only do you get to go to the doctor, but that, oh, wait, the prescriptions they write you can take. So being able to afford those things, people are understanding much more, especially in the last 2 years, the value of what governments can do, can be a part of, where they can be a force for good and for change, and frankly, where they can come up short. And what I know about Andrea Horwath, and I know people like to talk a lot about, oh, this is her, third or fourth kick at the can.
Fourth.
The reality is she continues to grow. She continues to resonate with people. And what we're also seeing is that people are taking a look at her post-pandemic and go, okay, I now get where the value of governments are, where we can support our communities. And they're looking at her as potential premier, not just that steel town scrapper that we know and love, but what can she do? What can she bring to the table? And what's the team around her that can really make Ontario better? So look, I know, Steve, you're a fan of Bill Davis and also of Sean Conway. Sometimes people hanging around for a while actually does benefit the people that we are serving. It is public service. And that's what I see from the Horwath campaign. And my goodness, I've never seen as much of a fire in her belly in the entire time that I have known her that I've seen in the last year with her.
Sumi, what was your view when you heard the Premier say the worst place you can send any money is to a government?
Well, I think it's missing the point that, I think people are suffering, Ontarians are struggling, and we need a government that is able to understand that and to be able to support our Ontarians, whether it's providing living wages, to keep up with inflation, or restructuring our healthcare system to support all of the long-term care, or ensuring that we've got the right infrastructure for our education system with students going back into schools with the pandemic. We're looking for a government that understands and is empathetic, and that's, I think, what you'll get from the Ontario Liberal Party and its leader and its team. We're looking at $10 a day childcare, and understanding that the impact of childcare has on our working class families. A 4-day work week. We've understood what the pandemic has meant for Ontarians. Over 130,000 employees in Ontario have chosen family over work, and that we need to ensure that our working systems are able to to recalibrate itself to understand the new normal. And we need a government and a leader that understands that, just keeping the money in the bank is not at all. Government is meant to support our Ontarians to ensure that they have the right services and infrastructure to be able to move forward with their lives. And in order to do that, we need to be able to fund it.
Rob, you've covered politics for a couple, 2-3 years. You ever heard a premier before say the worst place you can send your money is to a government?
I've never heard that, and I always thought the best place to send your money was to subscribe to the Star or donate to TVO. I know that's kind of an odd thing for him to say. I think at this time when, as I think Kim was mentioning, or maybe it was Sumi, that we've learned the value of government in this pandemic. And in fact, before the pandemic hit, the PCs were going to cut back on public health and had to reverse that. So, here we are. And I think in the election in the spring, people are going to be looking for who do they think is best placed to lead Ontario out of this and paint a new vision for what the province can be post-pandemic. Hopefully, we don't get a new variant that's evasive of vaccines, and hopefully we're out of this, elastic waistband work at home phase by the time the election rolls around next June.
Ginny, I'm down to my last couple of minutes, and I just want to try this one more time because I appreciate that the Premier has this keep taxes as low as possible brand that he needs to burnish. I get that. But I wonder whether the comment displayed a kind of an ignorance about the fact that if people don't send any money to the Treasury, hospitals don't stay open, roads don't get paved, subways don't get built, et cetera, PPE doesn't get purchased, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think he understands that?
Well, I think it would be impossible for a premier who's invested billions. We can talk about the size of the deficit, and I'm not bragging about the size of the deficit or the government's debt, of course, but to think that somehow this commentary means that this is an austerity premier, an austerity government, I think flies in the face of the massive amounts of investments that they've made into healthcare, especially, but government services across the board these last number of years. This is not an ideological premier. He is not an ideological conservative who wants to slash and burn. In fact, he's invested billions as a government across the board. But he is a sort of grassroots populist guy at the end of the day. And he knows how the average voter feels, which is, yes, I want my healthcare, I want childcare, I want a strong education system, all of those things. And I think the government will prioritize those things going into the election. But they also need to be able to afford to live, and the cost of living is going up. And the last thing they want is a new fee or a new tax. They don't care what level of government it comes from. They just know they can't afford it. They can't afford hydro rates when they need to heat their homes. They can't afford the cost of groceries going up. They can't afford any of it. And for them, I don't think they care where they're spending their money. If there's a new cost to their lives that's going to make things more expensive, to Kim's point, it might make the difference between being in poverty or being out of it. And so I think in those moments, the premier is connecting with people in a way that a lot of politicians aren't able to do.
Our thanks to Ginny Roth, Kim Wright, Sumi Shan, and Rob Ferguson for joining us on TVO tonight. To be continued, friends. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.